Hello everyone, and welcome to my final video of this series. I decided to make this video because there are some things that I did not cover as well as I should have during the main playthrough. First, I'll get a quick gameplay quirk out of the way. I mentioned the Rings of the Stars give special benefits to each character, but I didn't talk about the Rycross ring. That's because it cannot be equipped at all, probably to avoid a plot hole caused by equipping your fifth party member with it and then switching them out for someone else. Now for the main topic. When I said the reason I liked this game it was just personal taste, that's technically true, but it's also kind of a cop-out, isn't it? It doesn't feel satisfying after taking all that time to go through the game. So let's go into detail. And that's appropriate because detail is central to why I love the game. There's all the things in towns and dungeons that get unique reactions from the characters, all those talk commands that add a bit of flavor, and of course every last reference to previous games, both as a minor side thing and as part of the story's foundation. Speaking of story, after Phantasy Star 2, the overall story of 4 seems a little bland by comparison and lacking in nuance. Yeah, there's the whole, is the Great Light any better than the Profound Darkness thing, but it's still pretty much about fighting the extra-dimensional monsters and occasional robots to save everyone. Phantasy Star 2 had this big narrative about how society can be oppressive without looking that way on the surface, and the perils of blind loyalty, and of course the ways the main characters fell afoul of it as they tried to fix things. So why didn't this one have anything like that? I'm going to guess that it was two things. One, as I just described, they did that already. I'm pretty sure the game said everything they wanted to about it in Phantasy Star 2. Second, it would be hard to sell something like that in a game where there wasn't a whole lot of society left in the first place. There's still hints that people aren't always the best. There's some examples of people putting their self-interest pretty far ahead of everyone else, but overall, everything's already breaking down. They don't need to pile anything on top of that. I appreciate them not going overboard with it. And let's not forget the combat. I think the separation of skills with limited uses from the technique pool add a lot of freedom, and I enjoyed it a lot. The monster and boss balance, if you don't grind, feel pretty good to me. I had plenty of close calls, but it never felt unfair. And of course, there's those monster animations. They're detailed, they're full of personality, most monsters have more than one, they have a certain logic to them even when they're bizarre, and by that I mean, there's never any question of why something like that would hurt our characters. There's no swinging at empty air, and then somehow damage numbers pop up. But to put this in context, let's take a look at some other JRPGs, bearing in mind that Phantasy Star 4 was first released in 1993. Arcana was made in 1992 by HAL Laboratory, and it holds up reasonably well. The monsters have resting animations, and the artwork is really nice. Their attacks aren't customized per monster, instead the monster graphic is replaced by an animation that's shared between groups of monsters, but it still looks pretty good. In fact, my only problem with it is how little detail the characters have in comparison. They don't have resting animation, and their attacks are a single frame. But I'm fine with the monsters being the star of the show. By the way, if you're interested in a 3D maze RPG, you could do a lot worse than Arcana. It shows its age a little, but the music in particular still stands out. Moving on. Breath of Fire 2 came out in 1994, and its monsters are very lively. They also have resting animations, and a lot of them have these lavishly detailed attacks. Granted, the spellcasting animations tend to be just flashing while staying in place, but overall, the artwork and graphic style are just beautiful. They do have that swinging at the air thing, which most games didn't solve until the Polygon era, but I can easily forgive that. The bosses especially look amazing. I mean, watch that. That's great. I think it looks really nice. I appreciate the work they put into that. And here we have Final Fantasy VI. Also first released in 1994. Wow, the monsters turn black and white for a second. Aren't those monster animations just so good? Sometimes an attack name appears and we visualize what's happening with the power of imagination. Don't get me wrong, Final Fantasy VI had things going for it, and I kinda understand their decision of variety and design over individual animations, but it's hard to ignore that you're fighting static 2D paper dolls. Finally, I want to go back to why I chose Phantasy Star 4 instead of doing the games in order. The main reason is, the early games are so grindy that I felt it would just take too long. Phantasy Star 2 especially is notorious about this, and even fan patches don't fully correct the problem. And then there's all of the generation branches of Phantasy Star 3. Even if I skipped the grind in my videos, I'm not sure who would sit through the whole series like that. Plus, I figured that Phantasy Star 4 had so many tie-ins to the old games that I could just explore the whole series in one go. And though I don't like to say it, the early games just don't look great by today's standards. Phantasy Star 4 holds up a lot better when it comes to visuals. But I've decided I'm not going to do things that way anymore. Even if an entry later in the series is what I want to show off the most, I should set up the foundation first. So let's talk about what I'm doing next. In early 1991, a Sega producer who used to work for Enix created a 3D maze game. It was praised for its colorful and lively graphics, catchy music, and distinctive menus. But compared to its successor, Shining in the Darkness was quickly forgotten. Why is that? Well, it was because in 1992, the game was taken in a new direction. The designers aimed for a role-playing game that would feel like Dragon Quest, but the encounters were strategy battles. The graphics were even more expressive and impressive than its more traditional predecessor, and they went to great pains to make sure that enemy turns resolved quickly so the player would not be frustrated. There's a lot more to say about it, so please join me in my next video series where I will explore the title that got me hooked on strategy games.